Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I'm sitting with...
This is Chris, subtitle editor and occasional writer.
Nicholas, I write video game reviews for the Dreamer's Edge.
I'm Francois, librarian, occasionally writer as well.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of thedreamersedge.com. And we've reached part 3 of our cinematic journey through time, by which I don't mean Hugo. And...
Nice.
Anyway, let's get back on topic. We've reached the 90s. We're going to discuss the best movies of the 90s. Alright, so Chris, why don't you get us started? You got your paper all ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. A little bit of audio for the podcast listeners. Okay, so I'm going to start right at 1990. Favorite movie? This is the movie that really kind of got me into the Coen Brothers, and it's a movie that I really found pulled me into a love of film noir that I then went backtracked and kind of saw a lot of the classics. I'm talking about 1990s Miller's Crossing.
Nice.
Gabriel Byrne. It's a great movie. A little bit like Fistful of Dollars, I'd almost say. You know, it's got that feeling, this one guy, he's a fixer, kind of playing two parties, two families against each other. And they've almost created their own language of this, like, not quite real 1930s mob speak. And it's a great, great movie. John Turturro's in it. He's awesome. And there's some scenes that are just beautifully filmed, but it's really the thing that drew me into it was the tone and especially the dialogue.
I don't disagree. The Coen Brothers are pretty good, and that's definitely one of their best.
I don't think it's gotten the attention it deserves, especially in the wake of, some pretty big successes, but for me, it still really holds, like, my DVD copy I think I got for $6.99 has no special features on it. So I'd love to see a Criterion edition of this, because I just really liked it. But yeah, this is it. Maybe not the best movie of the decade, but, one of my favorites, so.
Yeah.
One I recommend a lot.
Sweet. It's your number 2 for best movie of the 90s.
We're going 1991. Year by year,
Ooh.
But this is one that really, I watched again recently. It stood the test of time. I didn't think it would, and it shocked me when I watched it, and just for that, and it still gets referenced, so I think it deserves to be on this list. Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, that's a great pick. I didn't think of that one.
Yeah.
I think what makes that movie is the two main actors. Like, for me, it's Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think there's much meat to that movie beyond their performance. It's a standard serial killer movie.
Well, I think Anthony Hopkins really nailed the part in a way that is. There's something to be said about the serial killer who's caught, who's behind a glass wall, i.e., in prison, and is still the scariest thing in that movie.
Like Magneto.
Oh, God.
Very much so.
Well, they both have a past tied to the Nazis. We soon learn. He's later.
I think Hannibal Lecter, the way Anthony Hopkins envisioned him, and not like in the Manhunter 1986.
Yeah.
If you look at television today, if you look at movies today, what's really in vogue right now is sort of like this one genius type person who can walks into a room and totally figures out what everybody's about just by looking at them, whether it's House or The Mentalist or whatnot. And certainly Hannibal Lecter is a precursor of that. I personally, my favorite scene out of that entire movie is the introduction scene where Jodie Foster first meets Hannibal Lecter, and he completely just figures out what she's about.
What's chilling about it is that he plays a psychologist, right?
Yeah.
But there's no empathy to him.
Yeah.
He takes you apart through sheer analytic,
Yeah.
and he does it well.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes us think we're just all machines, the way, and you can see how I'm working. You're going to take me apart. You're going to eat me. You know what I mean? But that's what's chilling about it. He's not human, but he's understands us better than we understand ourselves.
But at the same time, he does the whole, the genesis of the movie is when Jodie Foster, walks out, and I almost hesitate to spoil the movie to those people who haven't seen it.
No, but put in vague ways, Jodie Foster taps into actually that humanity that
exactly. He just there's something about him that really respects courtesy. and she was courteous to him, and then something happens, and you're right in saying that movie really edges on the relationship between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, and it is pretty awesome. Like, I will say that one of my picks, so like I'm getting ahead of myself, but Silence of the Lambs is going up against Goodfellas that year, if I recall. Yeah, Silence of the Lambs kind of like came in and swooped everything, and it was like a kind of a perfect storm. And they gave Scorsese an apology Oscar for The Departed eventually, which, in my opinion, didn't really deserve it. But all this to say that Silence of the Lambs is certainly a very good choice.
Yeah, like I said, I got loaned a DVD copy and I watched it through, and it still gave me the chills. And it's a great movie. Anthony Hopkins is awesome. Not really the type of film I generally like, and it's been spoofed since, but it was so well done. It's just a good and excellently crafted story.
No, it's true. It's excellent with a nice Chianti.
I'm going to bypass that and go straight to number 3. And actually, I had a little bit of trouble with this one, so I'm going to bypass the film noir one that I think deserves to be on this, and I'm going to go more towards another genre that I like, that I was really happy got revisited this year in 1992, because as I'm going year by year. But it was The Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood. It's, again, a movie that I've watched a couple times. Was the first time they really did a Western well in, like, it feels like a decade, at least, And it was just an excellent revisiting of both his own myth and also the myth of the Western, and it's a great, great story.
Yeah, it works well as almost a cap for his career in sort
that
of
genre.
Spaghetti Western.
Yeah, and because I don't think he's gone back to it. I don't think he has, but
not to my knowledge, anyway.
And he's but he directed it, right?
It was kind of as a renaissance, I think. Like, really, just as a
yeah, because he's been resurgent ever since.
Well, totally. Like, we got up a whole bunch of Oscars. I think you're right in saying that he revisits the Western, but he also revisits his own myth, his own role through all these movies. I had problems with Unforgiven. I liked some of the overall message, but I think that the Clint Eastwood was the essential element in it. It's also the beginning, I think, of his long ongoing relationship with Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman certainly helped in that movie, I think.
It's a fairly heavy-handed movie that is nonetheless understated. And this is how I would almost describe any Western. The motifs are very over the top, but the plot points are quite quiet nonetheless. They rely on tone, on color, and landscape, sometimes more than actually dialogue. And I feel the way they play the idea of justice in a society that's kind of like forming itself, recovering from, whether it's alcoholism or, like a war or whatever, the Western really kind of captures that sense of like rebuilding and, a question of laws, old and new, and where a person stands against them. And I thought this one really kind of caught it well, and it was well timed. Like I said, they've tried to reboot the Western as a viable genre many times, and I don't think it'll ever take again the way it did in the 60s and the 50s, but I think that this was a nice swan song to, the genre.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. And I think I disagree a little bit with you, Frank, when you mentioned the heavy-handedness. I think melodrama is sort of intrinsic to the Western genre, and like you pointed out, there's both subtlety and that sort of over-the-topness. And I think that's the point. What's kind of cool about Unforgiven is that you have the big melodrama sort of driving the plot, but what actually makes the story isn't part of the melodrama. It's sort of things on the side. It's sort of as if the subtext was following a different rule than the plot, the main text, if you will.
The Eastwood character is caught in a series of plot lines that are almost not of his own making, but he's kind of pulled into someone else's story, despite himself, But what informs his actions is his own past, which he's tried to draw a line against. You know what I mean? And yeah, I don't know. I thought it was an interesting lesson. But go on. What are your choices? I guess you've already...
I'm jumping in.
Also, yeah.
I've just decided to jump in. Okay. Goodfellas.
That's your number 3 pick for best picture of the 90s?
That is my number 3 pick. Absolutely. It was a tough battle between Casino and Goodfellas for number 3. I think I enjoyed Casino more, but Goodfellas came at a time where well, it was a precursor to a certain extent. It kind of redefined the mafia movie. Like, everybody looks at Godfather, but, I think Goodfellas was a way more honest look at the sort of the mafia lifestyle. The casting was incredible. I mean, Joe Pesci's been essentially, replaying the same role over and over. Ray Liotta was awesome, and I'm very big on movies that use sort of an off-screen narrator. When it's well done, I find that it just draws me into the story a whole lot more, and Goodfellas really perfected that.
Well, especially because it takes place over so many years.
Well, exactly, but
you need that kind of through line of one voice to kind of fill in the gap.
I've heard that line so many times. Of the opening of that movie being so brilliant, it's like three guys driving down a road at night, and there's a thumping noise. They open the trunk, there's a dead body. Well, not dead body. The guy's still alive. They kill the guy. Just zoom into Ray Liotta's face. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be a gangster. The use of music, Scorsese is at his very best.
I also like the camera work in Goodfellas. It's like it has some of the longest shots and more daring shots where it's a very long shot where the camera goes everywhere from room to room, and it's just even visually it's really fascinating. Yeah,
certainly, it's one of those film studies classes. You know what I mean? Like you kind of watch this movie and like he's kind of taught you something. You know what I mean? Like he's brought you through a story because he has his tricks, and he revisits a vital part of like the American mythos too. And no, I liked it a lot.
Well, to me, it's also like I guess I was also looking at it from a standpoint of does it inspire later on, and you can't have The Sopranos without having Goodfellas. Like it really sort of, I think it really redefined things. Like a lot of people before Goodfellas really, you say mafia, you think The Godfather, and The Godfather is a really awesome movie, but it's also a movie in which a lot of the unpleasantness that is intrinsic to the mafia is absolutely not shown or even hinted at. So it's very easy for us to slowly but surely build a kind of sympathy for individuals like Don Corleone, because you never see a woman being forced into prostitution. You never see a guy having his legs broken because he didn't pay his gambling debts. You never see somebody shooting up in heroin, and you sort of develop this sort of illusion where you see the mafia as this very noble institution that's really, a feudal kind of, group where people are honorable and this and that, and they do what they have to survive, and, and the Goodfellas sort of resets the clock on all that and really shows you what it's really like to a certain extent, and really over a course of years. Of course, they mythologize a lot of what being a gangster is all about, but they also show you the dark side in a very interesting way. So
I don't know. I think it's because I don't like Scarface so much.
I love Scarface,
and I do find that this movie is kind of almost there's an element of that, the grandeur and then the bit of the fall. You know what I mean? And I find it a little bit of a boring trope. You know what I mean? That's my own.
I would say a Scarface being a fictional story and a Goodfellas being based on a true story, and it's the Henry Hill story, and he does end up ratting out all his friends and going into the witness protection program, and still sort of missing the good life to a certain extent. Like I wouldn't be as harsh on it because of that. And I actually read the book the movie was based off, and it's kind of interesting to see. You sort of realize how gangsters sometimes they've got all these little scams going that are kind of like ridiculous when you stop to think about it. But anyways,
that's just the life.
It's kind of just life. Number two pick for best movie in the 90s, Frank. It's interesting that you brought up westerns, because my best western pre
Posse.
It's Young Guns. Sorry, we're talking.
You know what? I prefer Young Guns to I prefer Young Guns 2 to Young Guns 1.
Oh yeah, me too.
It's got a better song.
It's got a better song,
but the story is more tragic. It's
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting. But I have to go with Dances with Wolves. I was really taken in by this notion of the frontier being something that disappears, and of having a character who sort of decides to go out there, to see something that hasn't been seen before, to go to the very edges of the United States before they were the United States. It's
On a 5-year mission.
On a 5-year mission. Touche. Certainly, they went all out on the filming, the shots. It's incredible. Like, it's really, from a visual standpoint, the essence of the Western, like the prairie, just incredible shots. The bison hunting scene, which is again, like, very interesting. I also like the fact that they touch on the sort of like the slow learning of the language. Yeah, and of course then they spend some time with, okay, how does this society react to this outsider who comes from far away? Again, I just like I really enjoyed it.
I don't as much as you do. I'll be honest. Like, I mean, like, don't get me wrong. It's better than the remake that came out in 2009 with the blue people. I don't understand what that was about. But
Because I was going to say I liked it, but the genre really wasn't perfected until The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise.
But the thing about it is, all these movies all bug me because they all correspond to a genre that I like to call the Noble Savage movie. And I always found that there was something inherently wrong with the Noble Savage movie, because the idea is all that you have this person who's not a savage, who comes from the mainstream culture, goes into the other culture, turns out to be the best at it, of course, because he's white, and then realizes that these guys, they're noble savages. You're still calling them savages, but you're praising them. And as an audience, you're supposed to go like, wow, he's so open-minded to consider savages not savages, because we all know they're savages. It bugs me. It's liberal racism for me, and it grates on me a lot.
I don't think it's quite that clear cut, because, well, in the case of the individual joining the society, I don't think he becomes the best in any way. He just decides to join the society, and if anything, he really decides to reject his old society towards the end of the movie. And I think the movie makes a very blatant and very sort of harsh criticism of the society that he came in, like that he originates from. And in the end, he even refuses his own identity, his old identity. Like, when he's captured by the Union soldiers, he doesn't speak English to them anymore. He just like, he sort of like, he shoves that back in their face. And it's the movie ends in a fairly tragic note too, like, as opposed to, Last Samurai did, in fact, end in a tragic note, but of course the Tom Cruise character kind of survives, which is kind of neat. In Avatar, the white character ends up like just essentially saving everybody, which is even like way over the top. But I think that as far as Western stories go, that kind of story had never been told before. I don't think there's a story. Correct me if I'm wrong, and if anybody can chime in with a Western movie that actually really takes that approach where
Star Wars.
Perhaps.
No, I was thinking of I can't remember the name, which bugs me. There's a John Wayne movie where he's all about, like, I'm going to get my niece back.
The Searchers.
The Searchers, that's it. And then at the end, it turns out like that what he thought the savages had done to his niece is not at all what happened at all, and he just goes around killing people because he's an evil cowboy white man. And like that one, I thought actually communicated those ideas a lot more effectively.
And you've got the women at home just, are you going to come home now? Are you going to come home now? No, we're still looking. Like, that's kind of demonstrates like how broken they were, these characters. But going back to Dancing with the Wolves, cinematically, I think it works. It's painted on that canvas that really like weds itself well to that size of a scope. You know what I mean? But does the story deserve it? It kind of forces you to follow that pace after a while, and it does dwell on like kind of like him getting to know this culture, and you kind of do learn to follow it at its pace. A good piece of art will teach you how to kind of appreciate it. And this one I found did. I didn't love it, you know what I mean? But it does kind of force you to kind of like, okay, I'm going into it thinking I'm going to get a Western, and then it's plonk in the middle. Like, it slows down completely, and it's not really a Western in what we expected, and it's really just more of a drama, and then there's a bit of excitement after a while, you know what I mean? And it's not a great story, but it is epic in its way. Right. And I found it succeeded. But I do find, it falls into that complete uncomfortable, we're a little bit overeducated, I can see where this is coming from, noble savage storyline, for sure. And it doesn't surpass it. That's what it comes down to. It's mired in its own trope.
It's all right.
All right, so
I accept your criticism.
all right, what's your number one pick
my
for
number
best movie of the
one-
90s so we can pummel it too?
Pummel it too. Another Oscar winner, Pulp Fiction.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, are you guys gonna run into? Oh,
No. But one of us is like
Nick-
we're each taking our turns. Essentially, is what's
Nick's
happening.
sharpening his knife. I don't know. Like, I mean, to me, I approach this exercise from a standpoint of sometimes you need a movie to make you rethink movies, and Pulp Fiction did that. You know, Tarantino approached it differently. I like the fact that, in an interview he quoted François Truffaut, and he said, a movie has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. And that's really what I take away from Pulp Fiction. A lot of people will say Jackie Brown was better. No, I just Reservoir Dog was unsettling and interesting, but Pulp Fiction remains absolutely his best, and in my opinion, the best in the 90s.
Okay, I'll take it away, Nick, because I want to hear that rebuttal at last.
I mostly have a problem with a movie where nothing actually happens. You watch the movie, it's just a bunch of stuff, and you get absolutely nothing from it. And there are other movies like that, like, for example, the action movie. At least you're entertained by the action, but here there's absolutely nothing. It's a bunch of criminals doing random stuff. Okay, it looks pretty, that's fine. Okay, you can make a movie that looks pretty, but give me something else in addition to that.
You mean like substance? Or?
Yes, substance.
Tree
It's
of life.
yeah, okay. I'd rather have a full plate of, bad-looking food than just some, a bite of a little piece that looks super nice, and, I'm still hungry after it,
That's the way French food is usually presented.
That's why I hate French food.
Okay, all right.
You
starting
fell
to
right
see
into that. I'm siding with Frank on this one. I actually think Pulp Fiction deserves to be in any top three. It was in my top three. I'm going to remove it so I can talk about something else, but we'll get to that later. And the thing about it, what I think makes it undeniably one of those movies that should be mentioned by at least one of us, is the fact that movies were made a certain way, and then Pulp Fiction came out, and then movies were made that way after that. And it's a movie that completely changed cinema in the 90s. It's one of those pioneers. And yeah, and it is, as you say, a bit of style over substance, but the style is substantial, essentially.
I completely agree. Just the only reason I didn't include it, and I don't consider myself a Tarantino hater, but I have been disappointed with a lot of the stuff he's done since Pulp Fiction. Inglourious Basterds I love. I'm one of the ones who liked Jackie Brown. But for me, Pulp Fiction, I lived with a guy who played the soundtrack non-stop for a whole year. And so I haven't ever gone back to watch the movie. And I'm right at that generation that as people were watching it, by the time they were coming out of their university degree, they were trying to come up with the next Pulp Fiction style movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's so ingrained in our culture that we forget how really emblematic it was for a period of time. Like, it gave a slick vocabulary to people, pairing casting with music, with plot, and it was really well done. You know what I mean? Like, maybe the plot didn't drive it forward to beat the giant robot, but, you know what I mean? Nonetheless, you know what I mean? Like, there was stuff happening.
It gave us seriously. It gave us Samuel Jackson for forever. Like, after that, he just became Nick Fury, just in waiting.
It also gave us, because we're talking about the early 90s here, 94? Yeah,
94.
94. Postmodernism was something more of something you'd find amongst philosophy circles and maybe a little bit in literature, not really something in mainstream cinema at all. And it sort of just brought it to the mainstream in the sense of, like, this is what it is. We're deconstructing the way we tell stories, and we're showing you the skeleton over the flesh, and that's how we do things.
It was only after that you could read a review where it actually said, "Oh, this was meta."
Yeah, that's true.
It wasn't before this. So good choice.
Yeah.
Goodfellas forgiven.
So is Dances with Wolves.
I don't forgive you.
I will do a special mention.
Yes, please do.
Upon further reflection, I've realized that Total Recall was made in 1990 and therefore belongs on this list. Total Recall is absolutely Schwarzenegger's best movie.
Are you out of your mind?
I think it is absolutely, like, it's just
Paul
awesome.
Verhoeven's Total Recall.
Absolutely. Philip K. Dick inspired, like great action scenes, awesome science fiction. It's got Mars as a main character. Come on, man.
Mars as a main character.
It's really just awesome. Like I just philosophical,
You've
deep,
been really trying to get a
interesting.
Sharon Stone movie into your top 10.
She's kind of hot. She is kind of hot too. It has almost nothing to do with the original short story, but I really enjoyed some of the SF tropes, and I think it went places that no other science fiction movie had
I'm
gone
going to say
before.
that Philip K. Dick has inspired a lot of the almost good movies of our...
There
that
you
has
go.
never
really
inspired a perfect movie.
I would say that later, like in the last few years, that's true. But if you look at the 80s and 90s, he's batting 1,000. Like, I'm sorry. Like, from Blade Runner to Total Recall to Minority Report, which is early aughts, actually, or not.
Yeah, it's
or,
early aughts. No, but actually, about Total Recall, Nick and I, we've seen it this year, actually. What do you think about Total Recall? What do you think about Total Recall in the context of a best of the 90s list?
It's just basic ideas that have been, I don't know, it's been seen before. I like my science fiction kind of anchored in reality. Having their oxygen,
I like my science fiction to be science fiction.
I agree with you that the final scene. I agree that
You
we can't raise the pressure of Mars instantaneously to a point where your eyeballs aren't going to pop out, which they wouldn't do in vacuum anyways. I totally agree with that. And I actually had an argument walking out of the theater with somebody who thought, no, man, that's actually exactly how it happens.
Yeah, I had an engineer tell me this. I was like, this is depressing.
But yeah, I like my science fiction to be based on science, I guess, is more accurate. And, the whole ending is based on them putting it, it's like, it's ridiculous.
Like, the thing is, it harkens back to, like, basically old stories from 1950s, Arthur C. Clarke, and, ancient civilizations visiting Earth, leaving stuff behind, which is kind of an interesting setup to begin with. I like the fact that the movie leaves you ultimately to question what exactly happened. And I personally have already made up my mind as far as, is it a dream or isn't it? There are certain clues in the movies that point me towards a particular direction rather than not. But I like this notion that, ultimately, what are you made up of? You're made up of your memories. Who are you? What defines your memories? Okay, what if somebody changes your memories? Who are you then? It's an interesting question.
Granted, your little sucker punch here with this weird movie at the end of our discussion, but you mentioned that this is a story that's based on something from the 50s, or whereas John Carter is based on something from 1911. And I think it kind of fails for the same reason. You know what I mean? Like, some of the stories have been told too many times. You know what I mean? Like, even the way you've described this idea of memory, watch Manchurian Candidate. You know what I mean?
Regarding Henry.
And so a lot of the stories are told well in different, more dramatic ways. You know what I mean? Just straight drama. And some of the science fiction elements in this story, I think the special effects haven't caught up to. And it looks bad. You know what I mean? And it takes you out of it. And
I kind of love it.
And it reminds you of kind of like the bad, like VHS tapes. You know what I mean? Like, with the Frank Frazetta cover that you would take. Like,
I don't know. It doesn't strike me as much as that. Like, if I put it in context, I don't see anything in that movie that was worse than some of the stuff that was being done.
A year later, you got Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
Terminator 2: Judgment Day's trickiest shot is essentially the little hand. You don't even see him rip it off. You just basically have the mechanical.
I'm pretty sure the trickiest shot was the truck jumping from a bridge while a motorcycle is running away from it with a kid on it.
That doesn't involve any CGI or whatever. That's just blowing up a bridge.
That is a director who knew what he could show and show well. Whereas a lot of the stuff that was shown in Total Recall was shown as just like, oh, maybe you shouldn't have shown that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
like the three breasts, the whatever,
hey, come on, man! Don't harken on the three breasts.
No,
man.
but there's a lot of the
you've never seen that before.
Why three breasts? You only have two hands.
I'm actually no. You have a good
But
point.
you do fine with two. That's the lesson of the movie. You wish you've got three hands, but you make okay with two. Sorry.
No, because he has a good point. And the three breast thing, I don't understand that. The three breasts. It's like, I'm sorry, but where do you put your head? It used to be comfortable with one breast on every side. Now what do you do? Like, you're suffocating on the third one? That doesn't work.
Okay, well, I'm going to send a call out to everybody who's listening to this podcast. I want a straight yes or no on Total Recall. Let's settle this in the comments section.
All right, so Chris, why don't you get us started? You got your paper all ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. A little bit of audio for the podcast listeners. Okay, so I'm going to start right at 1990. Favorite movie? This is the movie that really kind of got me into the Coen Brothers, and it's a movie that I really found pulled me into a love of film noir that I then went backtracked and kind of saw a lot of the classics. I'm talking about 1990s Miller's Crossing.
Nice.
Gabriel Byrne. It's a great movie. A little bit like Fistful of Dollars, I'd almost say. You know, it's got that feeling. This one guy, he's a fixer, kind of playing two parties, two families against each other. And
Nailed the part in a way that is... There's something to be said about
it's
the serial killer who's caught, who's behind a glass wall, i.e. in prison, and is still the scariest thing in that movie.
like Magneto.
Oh God!
Very much so. Like,
Well, they both
there's-
have a past tied to the Nazis, we soon learn.
You know, he's
Sequels
really-
later.
I think Hannibal Lecter, the way Anthony Hopkins envisioned him, and not like in the Manhunter 1986.
Yeah.
If you look at television today, if you look at movies today, what's really in vogue right now is sort of like this one genius type person who can walks into a room and totally figures out what everybody's about just by looking at them.
They've almost created their own language of this, not quite real 1930s mob speak. And it's a great, great movie. John Turturro's in it. He's awesome. And there's some scenes that are just beautifully filmed, but it's really the thing that drew me into it was the tone and especially the dialogue.
I don't disagree. The Coen Brothers are pretty good, and that's definitely one of their best.
I don't think it's gotten the attention it deserves, especially in the wake of some pretty big successes. But for me, it still really holds. My DVD copy, I think I got for $6.99, has no special features on it. So I'd love to see a Criterion edition of this, because I just really liked it. But yeah, this is it. Maybe not the best movie of the decade, but one of my favorites. So
Yeah.
one I recommend.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast. I'm sitting with...
This is Chris, subtitle editor and occasional writer.
Nicholas, I write video game reviews for the Dreamer's Edge.
I'm Francois, librarian, occasionally writer as well.
And I'm Dimitri, webmaster of the dreamersedge.com. And we've reached part 3 of our cinematic journey through time, by which I don't mean Hugo. And...
Nice.
Anyway, let's get back on topic. We've reached the 90s. We're going to discuss the best movies of the 90s.
All right, recommend a lot.
Sweet. What's your number 2
Number
for best
2.
movie of the 90s?
We're going 1991, year by year.
Ooh.
But this is one that really, I watched again recently. It stood the test of time. I didn't think it would, and it shocked me when I watched it, and just for that, and it still gets referenced. So I think it deserves to be on this list. Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, that's a great pick. I didn't think of that one.
Yeah.
I think what makes that movie is the two main actors. For me, it's Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think there's much meat to that movie beyond their performance. It's a standard serial killer movie.
Well, I think Anthony Hopkins really